Hello and welcome to Embedded Librarians, Embedded Libraries, Embedding the Library into the Fabric of Higher Education. This is your first lecture in week 1.
Hi, I'm Meredith and I am your instructor for this class. I'm really looking forward to getting to know you this year. I currently work at Portland State University, which is a large public university in Oregon. It's actually the largest public university in Oregon. I'm the General Education Instruction Coordinator at the library here, which basically means that I coordinate instruction to most of our lower division undergraduate classes, as well as our library credit class and our intensive English language program. I'm also the academic liaison to anthropology, university studies, international studies, Chicano Latino studies, and conflict resolution. I think that's all of them. I know, quite a few, right? I'm also a tenure track faculty member here, which means I do a lot of publishing and presenting and research on service, which is wonderful in a lot of ways and stressful in a lot of other ways. I live in Portland, Oregon with my husband and my wonderful 4.5-year-old son, Reed, who is just amazing and smart and great. And yeah, I'm just pretty busy. um, I started the blog Information Wants to Be Free back in 2004 and have been the sole author of it ever since. I really enjoy writing. I see it as a service to the profession where I can share my ideas, the things I've struggled with and how I've dealt with them. It's been a wonderful experience. I also wrote a book that was published by Information Today in 2007 called Social Software in Libraries, Building Collaboration, Communication, and Community Online. This book was very popular and was a required reading in most or all of the Web 2.0 classes that were offered at San Jose State during the past decade. I taught some of the Web 2.0 classes since 2008. And I'm really excited to be teaching this new course that really relies on a lot of the experiences that I've had both as a distance learning librarian, as an instruction librarian, and as someone researching best practices for instruction.
So back in 2005, when I was just a baby librarian, I read this wonderful post by Lorcan Dempsey, who is the head of research at OCLC. And this post in the flow was so influential to how I viewed what we should be doing as librarians. And one thing he said in this was, the library needs to co-evolve with user behaviors. This means that understanding the way in which research, learning, and consumer behaviors are changing is key to understanding how libraries must respond. I found this hugely influential. I really started to think about how the library needs to be part of the user's environment rather than expecting the user to find their way into the library environment. And this means making things make sense for users. It means integrating library resources into the user's environment and workflow is our ultimate goal. So what is this class about? You can certainly look at the learning outcomes for the class, and that will tell you a great deal. Um, but in a bigger sense, libraries used to be thought of as the heart of the campus, and people still say that a lot. They say, oh yes, the library is at the heart of the campus. But I think that's changing. I think it's changing because university budgets are getting slashed. Universities are getting less money from the state, from their students. Costs of things are going up. The downturn was a big deal. And the library is a place where it's easy to cut because a lot of our administrators, a lot of our faculty, and a lot of our students simply aren't coming there anymore. And they may still be using our services and everything and our resources online, but they may not think of it as necessarily coming from the library. And you're going to see some stats next week that will show you sort of faculty attitudes towards the library. So, and at the same time that budget cuts are happening, we're seeing much more of a push for institutions to demonstrate their value, whether it's the university or the library, to say, hey, this is what we provide, this is how it's impacting students. And, libraries traditionally have shown things like, here's how many books we have, here's how many people checked out books, here's our database usage, not what was the impact of this on student faculty success. So we need to start thinking about, how can we remain vital? How can we support students and faculty and play an important role in their success? How can we become part of the fabric of the institution to the point where having a librarian involved in things like curriculum design, student success initiatives, and research projects is the norm rather than the exception? Being this integral is so critical at this point. And this term we're going to explore all sorts of ways that librarians can embed themselves into the fabric of higher education to support students, faculty, and the institutions that they're a part of. We'll look at lots of examples of libraries that have tried different types of embedded librarian initiatives. We'll look at the pros and cons, and we'll try to come up with best practices for embedment. Let me just get to the next slide. Sorry about that. Whoops, wrong way. All right, so what is embedded librarianship? And I know the popular image of embedment was, embedded journalists. We certainly saw that a lot in the early part of the Iraq War. And that's where the term embedded librarianship came from, though obviously it is very, very different from embedded journalism. And you're going to read a lot of different definitions this week of what embedded librarianship is, but I'm just going to talk about a few of them here. So David Shoemaker, who wrote a whole book on the topic, sees it really in opposition to the quote-unquote traditional librarian. He says, quote, "In traditional reference work, the operating assumption is that all librarians are interchangeable. The patron is supposed to deal with the librarian on duty at the desk at a given time, and the librarians are expected to deliver consistent service regardless of the nature of the request." Whereas embedded librarianship is really focused on building relationships, developing shared goals between faculty and librarians, and really creating customized, high-valued contributions. So in that sense, the librarian is far from interchangeable. And it's more than about being responsive. It's about anticipating the needs of our users, coming up with our own initiatives to proactively embed. So it's really more than just being at your service. It's librarians as partners with faculty and students and other people on campus. Barbara Dewey kind of sees it as the librarian being involved in all aspects of campus life. So really being not just physically in the library, but being a part of everything that goes on in campus life. And on the other hand, she sees it also as making the library a vibrant space for collaborative knowledge creation. So it's a little bit about getting out of the library, and it's also about improving the library. Brower sees embedded librarianship as being marked by collaboration, partnerships, and long-term planning for services focused on proactively meeting patron needs. He talks about becoming, quote, immersed in the culture and spaces of users. And I really like that idea of that immersion. And that immersion really requires a deep understanding of our patrons. So there are lots of different ways that librarians can be embedded in the institution, but the most common one that we hear about is being embedded in the learning process. And you'll see tons and tons of articles out there, especially on librarians being embedded in courses where they're either co-teaching or they're actually physically in the class or online in the class all the time, being available for students at their points of need. But there's lots of different ways that this can happen. Librarians can be part of student success initiatives happening at the campus level or the departmental level to improve student success. They can be involved in the curriculum where you're working with a specific department to integrate information literacy and support students. Then, of course, at the class level, which I just talked about, librarians can be involved in course and assignment design, and developing content for courses where they're actually working with faculty when they're building the courses to embed information literacy into the course, to help design assignments that scaffold the development of research skills. These are great ways to seriously impact a course without needing to provide more face-to-face or online instruction. Um, they can also train faculty and TAs to teach information literacy. This is sort of a train the trainer approach where we could focus on helping faculty and TAs to actually teach information literacy, because frankly, at most institutions, we do not have enough librarians to provide information literacy instruction in all of the classes that might need it. So, and since the faculty members and the TAs are with students all the time, it makes sense for them to be seen as partners. We shouldn't be the only ones who can teach information literacy skills. Also incorporating licensed content into classes, so instead of making students pay for course packs, encouraging faculty to use the ebooks and other tools that we have already available for them. And also partnering with different units on assessment. I've found that partnering with units on assessment often leads to opportunities to talk about what you've learned and to then embed information literacy into the curriculum based on what you've learned from the assessment. So there's also the idea of going where your users are, whether that's online or face-to-face, of getting out of the library and being in user spaces to support them. That could mean being in the learning management system, which is a very popular way to and high impact way to serve students. It could be going into other online spaces that users frequent, like Facebook, Twitter, or even if there's an intranet at your university, that could be an opportunity. Some librarians are in departmental offices. Some do office hours in departments. Some even have their primary office in a department, and that's a great way to really be where your users actually are. They could be in other student or faculty-centered spaces across campus, like lounges or rec center, etc. And also, in a similar vein, working to embed help, whether that's reference help or library tutorials or other things, at users' points of need online and in the physical world. And then there's also embedding in research, and this is mainly I'm thinking about with faculty. So thinking about ways that we can become integral to faculty research processes. And that could mean simply just helping faculty, like I just worked with a faculty member on his lit review because he's looking at a new area of research. So being able to help with that is really valuable. But in some cases, librarians are actually part of a research team. And I think as we start to get more involved in data management and scholarly communications activities, we can be much more helpful in supporting faculty in these areas that perhaps they don't have expertise in. And finally, we can get involved in campus life more. And that could mean partnering with non-academic units like the Learning Center, the Tutoring Center, the Writing Center, the Career Center, or even units like IT or the Teaching and Learning Center on campus if you have an academic computing center. With any unit whose goal is to support students or faculty, those are obvious partners for either cross-promoting services, for offering services together, for doing workshops. There's so many wonderful opportunities within that. Also, we could work with student organizations. I know last year I provided instruction for an honor society. We've provided instruction in dorms, in residence halls. Librarians in some places are embedded in the residence halls. You could have librarians in student study spaces, and also librarians getting involved in campus governance. Having librarians with faculty status, or at least with the ability to become part of faculty senate committees, really helps to make us more integral to the institution. So, Watstein and Kesselman suggest in their article that most traditional library organizations are not ideally structured to provide the flexibility needed to make embedded librarian initiatives successful. They suggest that team-based structures with significant autonomy are more ideal. And I would agree that it's difficult to be very proactive, nimble, and daring in a more traditional hierarchical organization. So I do think that team-based organizations with more flexibility and autonomy are really the ideal. So I'm just going to talk briefly before we conclude with my own history of embeddedness. This is going to come up in a lot of our future lectures because a lot of my experiences have really shaped my thinking about some of these services. So, as I said, I was first a distance learning librarian at Norwich, and one of the first things I was tasked with doing was building a library presence in our learning management system. And that meant really providing our content and services where our users were. I also implemented our virtual reference service at the same time, which made us much more available to our online students. I also worked with faculty to embed library resources and instructional content into courses so that they were using not just whatever resources that students had to buy, but resources that we'd already paid for through our subscription. And I also did an online embedded librarian pilot in several research-intensive classes where I had a discussion board and was enrolled in the course and was part of their learning landscape. And I'm going to talk about that experience a bit more when we get to talking about being embedded in courses. As the head of instructional initiatives at Norwich, I was our social sciences librarian, and I integrated information literacy into the history curriculum, which was a very successful and fruitful partnership with the faculty in that department. I also developed a standard library instructional component that was integrated into all English 101 classes. Finally, at Portland State University, I created a tool called Library DIY, which you're going to hear more about in the week that we talk about point of need instructional support and providing support at users' point of need. This is a tool that helps students get to just the instructional content they need to move on with their research, and it's unmediated point of need instructional support. I've also taught workshops to faculty on research assignment design, and we adopted a train the trainer approach for information literacy instruction in our freshman inquiry program, which is what all first year students take. And this was in addition to providing traditional one-shots. We wanted to train the faculty and peer mentors to be able to teach students research skills, and we give them the tools to do that. So I'm really looking forward to working with you this semester and hearing all of your interesting and exciting questions about as we explore this important professional trend. Thank you.